Well, so in our second part, we will go over the definition of a monopolistic competition and oligopoly, and also focus on how the oligopoly, in an oligopoly market, the managers make strategic decision by the use of a game theory. So let's start. I share with you. So imperfect competition and strategic behavior. Monopolistic competition originally developed to deal with the phenomena of product differentiations. First developed in 1933 by the US economist Edward Chamberlain. And these are the four characteristics of a monopolistic competition. Like we discussed, perfect competition with the four characteristics, monopoly with few characteristics, and now the monopolistic competition with four, again, the four very clear characteristics. Number one is many firms, like perfect competition. In a monopolistic competition also, there are many firms. Freedom of entry and exit. So that's again, same, very similar to the perfect competition and monopolistic competition, freedom of entry and exit, and product is somewhat differentiated from others. So that's a difference. That's a difference, that products in somewhat differentiated from others. But in a perfectly competitive market, the products are homogeneous. So that is the difference point. Firms have some control over its price. So, and again, this is also different from the competitive market, because in a competitive market, the firms are price takers. But here we see that the firm has some control over its price. Now, what are the basic assumptions of a monopolistic competition? Each firm produces its own version of the industry's differentiated product. So overall, there is an industry of that product, but each firm is producing a very, within that general product, a differentiated product. So that faces a demand curve that, although negatively sloped, is highly elastic, because competing firms produce many close substitutes. So the products, those who are produced by others, are very close substitutes. Like I gave you an example of a coffee. So coffee of a Tim Horton or a coffee of a Starbucks are substitutes, and very close substitutes. Same is the case with the toothpaste or shampoos and all other these products. All firms have an access to the same technology, so have the same cost of curves. So we are believing that the costs are also same. The cost curves are same. The industry contains so many firms that each one ignores competitors when making price and output decisions. So that's again the many firms like a competition, like a perfect competition. Firms are free to entry and exit. So these are the four basic assumptions. Now, based on these assumptions, we are assuming here that a typical firm in a short run, what is happening? They determine the quantity. Monopolistic competition determining the quantity by equating minor cost into minor revenue. And after that, they determine the price by placing this quantity into their demand function. And we see here that the monopolistically competitive firm are enjoying economic profit in the short run. But what is going to happen in a long run? As there is an economic profit and entry and exit are free, or a freedom of entry and exit, so new firms going to enter into that market. So when the new firms enter, what is going to happen? The demand goes down, and we see that when in the long run, the demands are shifting in such a way that is going to tangent to the long run average cost curve. And we see here that there is zero economic profit. So what we can say very easily from these two graphs is that in the short run, monopolistic competition can earn economic profit, but in the long run, it is not possible. So they operate at a zero economic profit. So in the short run, firms operating in a monopolistically competitive market structure is similar to the monopoly. In the long run, each firm is producing an output less than that corresponding to the lowest point on its LRSC curve. And we see here that they are not producing at here, they are producing at EL. So EL is higher than the minimum of LRAC. So if the firm increases its output, cost per unit decreases, but revenue decreases by more than the cost decreases. So selling more would reduce revenue by more than it reduced costs. So when a firm produces an output less than that corresponding to the lowest point on its LRAC, the firm has excess capacity. And the excess capacity theory is the property of a long-run equilibrium in a monopolistic competition that firms produces on a falling portion of the long-run average cost curve. The result is excess capacity measured by the gap between the present output and the output that coincides with the minimum average cost. Now, so far what we discussed is a monopolistic competition. Now we are focusing on an industry in which very large, few large firms are operating, and that's what we call it as oligopoly. Now, for an oligopoly market, we have to use the tool which we call it as a game theory. Now, game theory is a subset of a subject in economics in which we discuss different strategies or different moves. Now, why we named it as a game theory? Because we convert every situation into a game and define the firms as a players, and those players have some strategies, and we see that what is an outcome and what is an equilibrium outcome. So we use this game, every situation convert into game, and then use the game to make your move or make your decision. So oligopoly is an industry that contains two or more firms, at least one of which produces a significant portion of the industry's total output. And how they determine profit maximization is complicated. It's not simple like what we noticed in monopoly and what we noticed in monopolistic competition. Determining the level of output that maximize profit is complicated for an oligopolistic firm because it must consider its rivals' likely response to its actions. Oligopolists exhibit strategic behavior and behavior designed to take account of the reactions of one's rivals to one's own behavior. So that's the way that it works. Now, the basic dilemma of oligopoly is that when they are making decisions, they are facing some situation. If they cooperate, the outcome is good. But if they cooperate and other player know that the one firm is going to cooperate, so it is in their best interest to compete. And by this way, they are always facing a dilemma. And we also represent this dilemma through one very specific case. We call it as a prisoner's dilemma, and we're going to talk about it as well. So if firms cooperate to produce among themselves the monopoly output, they can maximize their joint profit. So if they do this, they reach a cooperative or a collusive outcome. If they cooperate, like very few firms, they can sit together, they decided the output, and by this they can make a more profit, or a profit like a monopoly. An industry outcome that is reached when firms proceed by calculating their own gains without cooperating with the other firm is called as a non-cooperative outcome. The non-cooperative outcome is also possible because they are rivals. They are competing with each other. So if they cooperate, that cooperation can work, but not forever. They are independent or they are separate firms, but they can cooperate or they can go for a competition, and that's what we call it as a non-cooperative outcomes. So economists use game theory to better understand how these firms behave. Now, what is a game theory? As I mentioned, is a theory that studies decision-making in a situation in which one player anticipates the reaction of other players to its own action. So that's a way that you anticipate your opponent's action against your opponent's reaction against your action. So that's the way that if I go for this, what is going to reaction, which is in the best interest of my opponent, is going to be the reaction. So when game theory is applied to oligopoly, the players are firms. The game is played in the market, and these strategies are their prices or their outcomes, output decisions, and the payoffs are their profit. So like any other game, we have players, we have a field in which is a market, and we have strategies, and then there are payoffs. Now consider two firms. Now, just for focus on a game theory, that how it works. Consider a two-firm oligopoly called a duopoly. It's very further define it. Oligopoly, few firms. Duopoly means two firms only, in which both firms are producing an identical product. And this is also one of the characteristics of oligopoly, that product can be differentiated or product can be homogeneous. So here we are talking about two firms, those who are producing identical products, and there is a single market price. The only choice for each firm is how much output to produce. So if these two firms cooperate to joint act as a monopolist, each firm produce one half of the monopoly output, and each earns a larger profit. If the two firms compete, they each produce more than half, say 2/3 of the monopoly outcome, and both firms earn low profit. And we represent this with this matrix, and you can see on a columns, we have a firm A, and in the rows, we have a firm B. And firm A has two strategies: cooperate, produce half of the output, monopoly output, and firm B's second strategy is compete and produce 2/3 of the monopoly outcome. Same is the case with the firm B, but firm B's strategies are in rows. So cooperate half of the monopoly output and compete like 2/3 of the monopoly output. And when we read this matrix, the first square of this matrix, which is cooperate for both the player strategy, we see that the profit is 20 million, 20 million. And when the firm A is competing and the firm B is cooperating, the outcome is that the profit for firm B is 15, the one who is cooperating, and the one who is competing is getting a 22 million profit. So same is the case here, but in a reverse position, like firm A is cooperating and firm B is competing. The profits are 15 for the one who is cooperating, and the 22 million for the firm who is competing. And if both are competing, they are getting 17 million. Now, if you look at this matrix, the first response is that both the firms are going to compete. Both the firms are going to cooperate because 20 million, 20 million. But think like this, that if firm A knows in advance that firm B is going to cooperate, what is in the best interest of firm A? Cooperate. If firm A knows in advance that firm B is going to cooperate, so what is the best interest of the firm A is to compete because by this way, the firm A can earn 2 more million. And same is the thinking can be for firm B. If he is sure that firm A is going to go for a cooperate, so it is in the best interest that they go for a compete. So under this scenario, both the firm is going to go for a compete and earn 17 million. Because otherwise, if they go for a cooperate and other goes for a compete, the profit goes down to 15. So 17 is better than 15. So it's good that they go for a compete and compete. So this type of solution is called as a Nash equilibrium, that we have to, it is not the best outcome. The best outcome is that both going to cooperate. But sometimes it happens like best interest is not achievable in the sense that if I go for this, the other one go for the other one, and by this way, it is not a stable outcome. So best outcome is not a stable outcome, but compete is a stable outcome because if you go for a compete, it doesn't matter whether B is going to go for a cooperate or compete. Right? So that's the way. So Nash equilibrium. Now, why would you call them as a Nash? Because Nash was an economist come mathematician. And he introduced this idea of a Nash equilibrium. In an equilibrium that results when each player is currently doing the best it can, given the current behavior of the other players. So note that each of the firm, the best action is to compete no matter what the other firm is doing. So in this game, the Nash equilibrium has both firms competing and producing the highest level of output. Very similar to that, there is a journal game, and we call them as a prisoner's dilemma. Now, prisoner's dilemma is like that. There are two players, two prisoners. We keep them, the police keep them separately and give them the option that whether you plead innocent or plead guilty. Both have given this opportunity to whether they accept it we did it, or if they say that we didn't do that. Plead innocent means they deny, and plead guilty means that they accept or confess. Now, in that scenario, you see that if both plead innocent, both will get a light sentence. or imprisonment. But if one plead guilty and the other one plead innocent, in that case, what is going to happen? The one who is denying or plead innocent is going to get a severe punishment. The other is going to get no sentence. And same is the case with the reverse position. And when they both plead guilty or they both confess, the situation is that they're going to get a medium sentence. Now, the Nash equilibrium again in this scenario or in this prisoner's dilemma is plead guilty, guilty. Like in this game, very similar. Compete, compete. So we see here as well. The reason is that if John plead guilty, it is in the best interest. If the John knows that the William is gonna plead innocent, it is in their best interest to plead guilty. And if Williams knows that John is gonna plead innocent, so it is in their best interest to plead guilty. So by this way, both is gonna settle on the, and that's what we call it as a Nash equilibrium for prisoner's dilemma. This game of a prisoner's dilemma or any other type of a game, we can extend. The simple game described applies to oligopolists producing identical products. Game theory can be used in other settings, how firms interact when they charge different prices for their differentiated products, how firms interact when the decision is whether to develop a new product or not to develop a new product. So these are the type of questions we can answer in a game theory. So so far what we discuss is monopolistic competition, and monopolistic competition is behaving like a monopoly because but in an oligopoly, few firms are there, so we have to make a strategic decision and we use game theory for that. So that's from this part. We resume the part 3, the remaining topics of the this monopolistic competition and oligopoly in the third part.